It's September 8th here in Seoul, and I'm Kim Dami. We begin with these stories making the headlines at this hour, starting with ASEAN-Indonesia 2023 in Jakarta. President Yoon once again called out Russia and China to take more responsibility in handling North Korea's nuclear and missile development. Wrapping up his ASEAN trip today, he's holding summit talks with his Indonesian counterpart before heading to India for the G20 summit. In the meantime, North Korea says it has launched a newly built tactical nuclear attack submarine that is capable of staging an underwater nuclear attack to further beef up the regime's nuclear deterrence. Apple lost almost $200 billion in value in just 2 days on Thursday, following reports that China plans to ban its officials from using iPhones. We start over in Jakarta. President Yoon has once again called on UN Security Council members to do their duty of implementing sanctions on North Korea, apparently targeting inaction by Russia and China. Our correspondent Oh Soo-young reports from the Indonesian capital.
President Yoon has called for global solidarity amid mounting threats to regional and human security by subversive forces amid geopolitical tensions surrounding North Korea, Russia, and in the South China Sea. Speaking at the East Asia Summit in Jakarta on Thursday, attended by some 18 regional countries, including the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, the US, Japan, China, and Russia, Yoon laid out Seoul's position on regional and global crises. On North Korea's nuclear and missile development, the South Korean leader said North Korea's weapons program not only violates United Nations resolutions, but poses an existential and direct threat to all countries attending the summit. He raised the need to block Pyongyang's illicit fundraising activities, which include cryptocurrency theft and illegal transshipment.
North Korea's development of weapons of mass destruction and lethal weapons ultimately equates to human rights issues in that it exploits the labor and human rights of North Korean citizens, fails to properly distribute food and economic assets, and focuses all of its assets and energy on nuclear weapons and missiles.
On that note, Yoon said member states of the Security Council have an even heavier duty of implementing UN sanctions on the regime, amid speculation that Russia and North Korea may strike up an arms deal. Also, Yoon touched on maritime tensions in the region, saying attempts to unilaterally change the status quo by force are unacceptable. He emphasized the need to establish a rules-based maritime order in the South China Sea, a key sea route, where 21% of global trade and a third of crude supplies pass through. Seoul plans to expand maritime security cooperation with the ASEAN and protect freedom of navigation. The South Korean leader further raised concerns about the ongoing war in Ukraine, calling Russia's invasion a clear violation of international law. He also expressed concern over the ongoing violence in Myanmar and voiced support for ASEAN's efforts to resolve the crisis through inclusive dialogue. Yoon's remarks reflect Seoul's firmer stance on geopolitical issues compared to previous administrations' more trade-oriented diplomacy. The top office says Seoul's growing push for freedom, peace and prosperity, showing that Yoon's multilateral diplomacy is rooted in the spirit of Camp David, which South Korea, the US and Japan jointly declared last month in their trilateral summit.
In their united approach to engaging with Indo-Pacific countries, particularly in the areas of advanced technology, cyber and maritime defense and development assistance, President Yoon aims to create new norms and build cooperation to uphold a liberal, rules-based order in the region and the world. Oh Soo-young, Arirang News, Jakarta.
President Yoon has called on China to ensure North Korea's nuclear threat does not become a hurdle in Seoul-Beijing relations. This came as the South Korean leader met with Chinese Premier Lee Chang in Jakarta following the East Asian summit on Thursday. Yoon told Lee that the trilateral cooperation can only get stronger if North Korea's security threat worsens. He asked China to fulfill its responsibility and role as a permanent member of the Security Council, and asked for Beijing's cooperation in holding a trilateral summit with Japan in South Korea. Lee responded positively and said the two neighbors and close trade partners should deepen cooperation to make their relations ever closer. So South Korea is looking to find a balance in handling North Korean issues, especially with China and Russia's relationship with the regime. For more, we are joined by Professor Yoon this morning. Welcome to the program.
Hey, good morning, and thank you for having me.
Sure. Now, first off, how significant do you think the sit-down was between President Yoon and Chinese Premier Li Chang? I mean, how do you think the talks actually went?
I think it was very significant because this is the first time the meeting has happened at this level in 10 months since the last time President Xi met with President Yoon. So given the circumstances, since President Yoon has met with Japan and the United States, having a meeting with China at this level, of course, is very significant because Korea's interest is to engage China very actively. And so since Korea has been drawing closer to Japan and the United States, it's really important for Korea to have these sort of high-level meetings to engage in dialogue with China, because China, of course, is going to have a major influence in what happens in the region.
Right, and at the same time, President Yoon couldn't stress enough how North Korea issues should not get in the way of Seoul-Beijing relations. Do you think, Professor, China took the message well?
I think China's interest naturally is to make sure that the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula happens. But I think the difficulty here, of course, is China's interest mainly is to make sure that the North Korean regime is stable. North Korea obviously serves as a buffer against sort of other interests in the region for China. And so this issue is complicated because China, I think, has a priority not necessarily to deal with denuclearization per se, but again, to make sure that the Kim Jong-un regime survives. And so in this context, while nuclear weapons on the peninsula certainly is a destabilizing effect, because obviously this may lead to a greater pressure on the North Korean regime from Japan, South Korea, and the United States, China, I think, has a complicated role here with respect to North Korea. And so it's unclear at this point whether or not China will play a really active role in this denuclearization process.
Right, that's why President Yoon also said North Korea's nuclear and missile development poses an existential threat that can strike all participating nations at the East Asia Summit yesterday. Now, what's behind such a strong statement from President Yoon this time?
I think he wants to be sure that he garners enough international support in terms of dealing with this issue. So obviously in this context, this happens sort of at a global level. And so in this context, this is the real issue here, is drawing in more international support for making sure that as well as solidify the global community's efforts to deal with North Korea on these different fronts.
Right. So I just asked how North Korea's nuclear and missile development can pose a great threat to all participating nations at the East Asia Summit. And that is because President Yoon is trying to garner all the international support, especially how the nuclear and missile threats are ever growing.
Absolutely. This is a real big problem for the region. So this is obviously one thing that Korea wants to make sure that obviously this is an issue that the global community is standing behind South Korea on a unified front against these kinds of threats to international peace and security.
Right, but at the same time, regarding tensions in the South China Sea, let's say, President Yoon said any unilateral attempts to change the status quo by force will not be tolerated. A comment apparently targeting China. Now, that stance is no surprise, right?
Yes, because Korea has a great interest in making sure that the South China Sea is stable. Korea obviously depends on international trade for exports as well as importing raw materials as well as other things. And so if the South China Sea is unstable and China dominates that area, that puts Korea in a very difficult position with respect to its economic growth. And so because of this, complicated matter with respect to the South China Sea, Korea has a great interest in making sure it's stable and it's open for navigation. And so in this context, Korea has a great interest in making sure the maritime order is stable and therefore is calling for a maritime-based order in the region as opposed to one nation, namely China, dominating the whole ocean there.
Right. I know the member states there had a collective voice on North Korean issues and also, food security. But how come the leaders at the EAS yesterday failed to draw a joint statement on the Ukraine crisis then?
Yeah, because the EAS summit was basically included both China and Russia. So in order to have a joint statement, you have to have consensus among all the members. So here, because there was never going to be any consensus on the matter, the best that happened here with respect to Ukraine was a chairman's statement by Joko Ri. And so the chairman's statement reiterated the position that the aggression in Ukraine was against international law and demanded the withdrawal of Russia from Ukraine. But as far as the joint statement was concerned, there was no expectation here because China and Russia were going to be needed to be supportive of such a statement.
Right. In fact, that was no surprise. All right. Thank you, Professor Lee Hee-hyun, so much for joining us this morning. We appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And as part of his ASEAN trip to Jakarta, President Yoon Suk-yeol later today will hold a summit with Indonesian President Joko Widodo at the Presidential Palace. The summit comes as the two countries mark 50 years of diplomatic ties, with the two leaders to discuss ways to expand cooperation moving forward. They are expected to sign agreements on security and economic cooperation. This is the third time the two leaders are meeting, following President Widodo's visit to South Korea last year, then the recent G7 summit in Hiroshima. North Korea continues to strengthen and show off its naval forces. This time, the regime unveiled what it claims to be its first tactical nuclear attack submarine during a launch ceremony on Wednesday. Our Lee Soo-jin tells us more.
North Korea continues to take an aggressive nuclear stance. North Korea's state-run Nodongshimun reported on Friday that North Korea unveiled a new tactical nuclear attack submarine. Its launch ceremony was attended by leader Kim Jong-un. The submarine, named Hero Kim-guno, is supposedly the North's first that is capable of nuclear attacks underwater. The report added that Kim said during the ceremony on Wednesday that the nuclear armament of the Navy can no longer be delayed, and that North Korea needs to accelerate efforts to supply the Navy with submarines loaded with tactical nuclear weapons so that it can smoothly carry out its strategic mission. This comes amid reports of North Korea and Russia moving to strengthen their partnership. According to Russia's state-owned Sputnik News, North Korean ambassador to Russia, Shin Hong-chul, said on Thursday that Russia and North Korea will strengthen their comradeship and stand in solidarity as they fight the common enemy. The remark was made during a celebration held at the North Korean embassy in Russia to mark North Korea's upcoming 75th founding anniversary. Meanwhile, U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris said in an interview broadcast on the same day that it would be a huge mistake for North Korea to supply ammunition to Russia amid its invasion of Ukraine. She also said during the interview with CBS News held on the sidelines of the ASEAN summit in Indonesia that she believes that such moves will only further isolate both Russia and North Korea. The comments reiterate the Biden administration's firm stance against North Korea supplying Russia with weapons, as it comes just days after White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan said that North Korea will pay a price if it moves forward with an arms deal. Lee Soo-jin, Arirang News.
And it's widely presumed that North Korean leader Kim Jong-un will travel to Russia by armored train next week. But South Korea's spy agency believes his travel route will be a different one completely. Our foreign affairs correspondent Bae Eun-ji reports.
South Korea's intelligence agency has said North Korean leader Kim Jong-un may take an unexpected route when he travels to Russia for a meeting with the country's President Vladimir Putin. The senior spokesperson of the ruling People Power Party said the National Intelligence Service reported this during a parliamentary meeting on Thursday.
There is a possibility that Kim Jong-un can make a surprise move by choosing a different route than what has been revealed by media.
This comes after the New York Times said Monday local time, citing unnamed American and other officials, that Kim would likely travel from Pyongyang, probably by armored train, to Vladivostok, where he would meet with Putin. It was also reported that a delegation of about 20 North Korean officials recently traveled to Vladivostok by train in late August, and then flew to Moscow to plan for Kim Jong-un's upcoming trip. Separately, citing Russian government sources, Japan's NHK News also said the summit between Kim and Putin could take place in Vladivostok. It reported the meeting could take place at the Far Eastern Federal University on an island off central Vladivostok, where the Eastern Economic Forum will be held for 4 days, starting Sunday. It says security has already been tightened there, and that students and others entering the campus have been instructed to take COVID-19 tests. It added that a visit by the two leaders to military facilities in the region is also being considered. Meanwhile, China will reportedly send its vice premier to attend the same forum. Chinese ambassador to Moscow said this to Russia's TASS news agency on Wednesday, without specifying the delegate's name. There are 4 vice premiers in China's State Council. This indicates that the country's leader Xi Jinping will not be there, ending speculation over a possible trilateral summit between the leaders of North Korea, China, and Russia. 배은지, Arirang News.
The defense chiefs of South Korea, the U.S. and Japan held phone talks on Thursday and discussed the measures to follow up the agreements made at the Camp David Trilateral Summit. During the talks, Seoul's Defense Minister Lee Jong-suk and his Washington and Tokyo counterparts Lloyd Austin and Yasukatsu Hamada decided to speed up the establishment of a real-time data sharing system for warnings about North Korea's missile launches. They pledged to strengthen response capabilities for Pyongyang's missile provocations by promptly launching trilateral joint military drills. The ministers also strongly condemned North Korea's launch last month of what it claimed was a space rocket. Apple stock is having a rough week, losing nearly $200 billion in value on Thursday, following reports that China will widen its iPhone ban at government offices and state-backed entities. Lee Seung-jae reports.
For the second straight day, Apple saw its stock prices sink sharply. After shedding 3.6% on Wednesday, Apple's stock price fell another 2.9% on Thursday. The 2 days of losses have led to Apple losing almost $190 billion in value. Several reports, including the Wall Street Journal and Bloomberg News, say that China plans to expand the ban on the use of iPhones at government offices and state-backed entities. Beijing has been increasingly pushing for the use of domestic products, as the use of technology has become a major national security issue for both the U.S. and China. According to Reuters, citing a source familiar with the matter, workers in at least 3 ministries and government bodies were told not to use iPhones at work. And while some have banned the use of iPhones only at workplaces, other agencies may completely ban the use of iPhones, even for personal use outside of the office. The source added that there's been no deadline given on when the new rules will be implemented, and it's not immediately clear how widely the ban was being enforced. The latest restriction comes amid an ongoing trade war between Washington and Beijing, which has further developed into a technology war. China has worked on becoming self-sufficient in core technologies and has been trying to reduce technological dependence on foreign countries over the past few years. The restrictions will be a huge blow to the American tech giants, as China is one of Apple's biggest markets, with the Asian nation generating a fifth of the company's revenue. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
Good morning, I'm Matthew Ashley, and we now turn over to stories from around the world. We begin in Türkiye, where rescuers are trying to extract an American man trapped in the country's third largest cave. Now, 40-year-old Mark Dickey became trapped in the Morka cave on Saturday after suffering from gastrointestinal bleeding. The experienced caver was sent emergency medical supplies, including units of blood. His bleeding has since stopped and he is now able to stand.
As you can see, I'm up, I'm alert, I'm talking. But I'm not healed on the inside yet, so I'm going to need a lot of help to get out of here.
Now, despite his improved condition, he will still need to be taken out on a stretcher. That could take more than 15 days, as Dickey is stuck at a depth of just over 1,000 meters. The operation currently involves some 150 rescue workers. Now, in Japan, the head of a major entertainment agency resigned on Thursday amid the first public admission of sexual abuse committed by its late founder. Julie Fujishima, the niece of Johnny Kitagawa, stepped down from Johnny and Associates while publicly apologizing to her uncle's victims. She said she had failed to take action and promised to compensate victims. It comes a week after investigators found that Kitagawa abused hundreds of boys and young men over 60 years during his tenure as agency head. Kitagawa was one of the most powerful figures in Japan's entertainment industry, making it difficult for victims to speak out over fear of losing their careers. He died in 2019 without ever facing any charges or admitting any misconduct. In the United States, Hollywood actor Danny Masterson has been sentenced to 30 years to life in prison for raping 2 women. The sentence was handed down on Thursday in a Los Angeles court. Masterson was found guilty on 2 of 3 rape charges in May after a prior mistrial. The rapes occurred over 2 decades ago at his Hollywood home. The victims said Masterson drugged them before committing the rapes. At the time of the crimes, Masterson was at the height of his fame, appearing on the popular sitcom That 70s Show, and when he and his accusers were all Scientologists. Prosecutors argued that the actor used his status in the church to pressure his victims into not coming forward. And finally, to Paris, France, where the 2023 Rugby World Cup is set to officially kick off. Starting Friday evening at 8:15 p.m. local time, the opening match will see hosts France take on 3-time world champions New Zealand at the Stade de France. Now, 20 countries are taking part in the 10th edition of the 48-game tournament. They're divided into 4 pools of 5 teams. New Zealand and France are favourites to win the Webb Ellis Cup. France has appeared in 3 finals but has never won a World Cup. The world's top-ranking side, Ireland, will also be looking for glory, despite having never previously made it past the quarter-final stage. The final will be played on October 28th.
Good morning. It's Baekno today, already the 3rd autumn seasonal term. And it is such a refreshing and comfortable start to the day. Some inland regions had chilly temperatures in the low teens to begin the day today. But highs will rise fast to the upper 20s and even low 30s, leading to wide gaps between lows and highs. Clear autumn skies will be a feature nationwide with high UV rays, so please take necessary sun care when out and about. There's no heat advisory in the country. The western parts of the country will be warmer again. Seoul and Chuncheon will be topping out at 31 degrees Celsius this afternoon. A similar weather pattern is in store for Saturday. Then it will get more cloudy on Sunday with rain in the forecast for the south coast and Jeju Island. And rain on Jeju will continue into early next week. That's Korea for you, and here's a look at the international weather conditions.
We thank you for watching New Day at Arirang. We'll be back next Monday at the same time, 9 a.m. Korea time.